Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be turning the hockey stick table that used to look like this into this. So here you can see all the caulk and hot glue and even some epoxy that's left over from the last video that was filmed a couple months ago, maybe even a year or two. And I'm going to clean it up so that I can make a better leg system and bracing for this hockey stick table. I already started on this side to see how hard it was, and I got most of the hot glue and caulk out, and then all I'm gonna have to do is just finish cleaning it up a little bit. Here you can see a majority of the gunk that I had to use to make sure that my epoxy would stop spilling out the bottom. And I will also clean up the caulk and epoxy drips that are on the bottom of the table. I began by removing the old bottom supports, which were just screwed down and stuck to the bottom of the sticks with some caulk and hot glue. I had to use some pry bars to snap them free, and then on the other side I had to use my multi-tool to saw through the epoxy that had leaked through and bonded the wood to the sticks. I used a vacuum to keep the surface clean while I was working so I could see what still needed to be removed. I then sanded down all of the rough spots that were on the top of the stick table and all of the epoxy that had spilled out over the wood, and then I began roughing up the surface and bringing everything down to level. I then applied a couple coats of polyurethane to the wooden parts after masking off the epoxied area. Next, I started cutting down the new side skirts that I would be installing, and I just used some fresh pieces of, I believe it was oak. I want to use these pieces to support the legs, however they're not long enough to span between each of the side braces. So what I'm going to do is take the cutoff from the side brace, cut it to the same thickness as this, or length, or however you want to see it, and then I'm going to glue it onto there and then make my final adjustments to the other side so that it fits perfectly. So normally gluing to the end grain, like I'm going to be doing, doesn't provide the strongest joint. However, I roughed up the faces of these blocks, and these pieces don't really need to be structurally sound, so it's not posing as an issue in this case. Next, I began cutting out pieces that I would be using as the new bottom support for the sticks. This support probably wasn't necessary, but it just kind of gave me the peace of mind that the bottom wouldn't bow out. I used pocket hole screws to connect the skirts to the legs, just so that the screws would be hidden, and then screwed in the new bottom support. Next, I started laying out the diagonal braces that I wanted to install in the middle of the table, and this was to make it so that the legs wouldn't wobble as much as they did. I tried doing this freehand, but as you can see, I ended up cutting it about an inch short. So next, I just took some measurements and threw it into a triangle calculator online, and that gave me a more exact length that I needed to use. I cut out sort of a bird's mouth shape with the jigsaw and cut the other angle on the chop saw. And I was pretty satisfied with how it turned out, so I just made another one quickly. I then routed out parts of the bottom supports so that they would fit over the screws that were pre-existing. in the pallets. I laid out where the bottom supports would be going with a silver Sharpie and then drove them in to the legs while the top was off. Next, I attached the diagonal braces to the middle support and then attached them to the bottom of the legs. I then took apart the diagonal braces so I could add some glue underneath, and then I showered it with sawdust so that I could clean up any excess glue and I could also fill in the loose gaps. Off camera, I painted it black and gave it a couple coats of polyurethane. And then I added more screws around the edges and along the sides so that the table would be securely held to the leg system. And all these new supports greatly reduced the wobble that the table had been getting previously. For the most part, it seems pretty smooth. However, you can see that there's a couple spots that have little bumps in them. And I think that's either because the resin that I used was old or the mixing cups might have not been thoroughly cleaned. But this tabletop should have been pretty clean because I wiped it down with some isopropyl alcohol before doing this. So the first time that I poured, there was gaps around the edges that I didn't account for, and the resin actually poured all over the floor, and there's like dried resin on the floor over there. So I went around after that cured and I caulked around the edges, which is what I had to remove in the beginning of this video. And then I tried to re-pour again, but I didn't make sure that the resin got nice and smooth before I torched it. So there were spots where it was just the first layer of resin and you could see the buildup of the second coat, but they didn't match up well at all. So that's why I sanded the whole thing down this time around so that I could try to make everything match up perfect. It's much better than it was before. Also, I put the poly around the outside of the pallet wood. I like that a lot, and I really do like the new leg system because the table doesn't rock back and forth anymore. So you can actually use it as a table. You don't have to like just have it as a showpiece that you can't put anything on, because that's basically what it was. You couldn't eat food on it because it would rock too much, and I actually blew out part of one of the legs that I had to repair with the long brace that went under here. So anyways, thank you for watching. I know that it's been a while since I've talked about this project, so I hope you all enjoyed. And if you haven't seen those other past videos, I'll be sure to put a little tag up in the corner, and I'll also link them in the description down below. So thank you again, and have a good one.